Before World War I, life in Great Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire was grand. Great Britain was the manufacturing center of Europe, France built a powerful army, and the Ottoman Empire's economy was booming due to oil. However, when World War I began, everything changed. After World War I broke out in the summer of 1914, the Allies, Britain, France, and Russia, held many discussions regarding the future of the Ottoman Empire. At the time, the Ottoman Empire was fighting on the side of the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. In March 1915, Britain signed a secret agreement with Russia that allowed Russia to annex the Ottoman capital of Constantinople, and in return, Russia would agree to British claims on other areas of the Ottoman Empire. More than a year after the agreement with Russia, British and French representatives, Sir Mark Sykes of Great Britain and Francis George Picot of France, authored another secret agreement regarding the future gains of the Great War. The arrangement allowed for the encounter of Great Britain and France into the Ottoman Empire and the exchange of Western European influence and culture on the area. This treaty, known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, is known as one of the most controversial documents of the war.
This is the British, the French, and the Russians coming to an agreement over something which was, up to this point, almost inconceivable.
The Sykes-Picot Agreement, officially known as the Asia Minor Agreement, was a secret agreement between the governments of Great Britain and France with the approval of Russia, defining their proposed spheres of influence and control in the Middle East. The agreement allowed for the exchange of cultural influence, the encounter of new civilization, and the exploration of new territory.
Great Britain and France encountered the Ottoman Empire by creating a secret treaty to control the area, dismembering it to their advantage, and governing certain areas in the Arab world.
On May 19, 1916, France and Britain concluded the Sykes-Picot Agreement. In the agreement, France and Britain divided up Arab territories of the former Ottoman Empire into spheres of influence. Since Saudi Arabia was considered the Holy Land, Great Britain and France decided to avoid influence in that area in order to prevent possible conflict. Also, since interests in conflict were very high in Palestine, it was agreed on as an international zone in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So, Britain and France were required to avoid encounter, exchange, and exploration in that area. According to the treaty, both countries were allowed to implement encounter, exchange, and exploration on agreed areas. France was able to exercise direct control over Part A, while Britain was able to directly control Part B. Picot and the government of France were determined to secure control of Syria for France, and in response, Sykes and the British government raised demands to balance out influence and encounter in the region. Great Britain and France needed to encounter and control the region for many reasons. The British wanted to protect the overland route to India, the jewel in the British Empire's crown, and the French had interests in the eastern Mediterranean. Also, there was oil in the region, and the British Royal Navy, which had switched its fuel from coal to oil, was adamant to secure new supplies. The Sykes-Picot Agreement greatly impacted European history. France sought Russian support for claims to Palestine, thus opposing the planned international zone agreed on in the treaty. In order to keep from inspiring all the Arabs across the region to rise up against their Ottoman overlords, the British wanted to keep the agreement a secret from the international community. Also, the British had already promised entirely different things to other people, most notable the Arabs. Thus, the British did not want the agreement to be revealed until after World War I. As stated before, Russia had been included in the Sykes-Picot negotiations because they were going to encounter Constantinople after the war. However, the Russian Revolution intervened and the new Soviet government discovered a Sykes-Picot document in the files of Foreign Ministry. They published it in 1917 as a considerable embarrassment of the British and French governments, thus making it known globally. After the publication of the treaty, British interests changed as a result. By the end of World War I, Britain was in search of a mandate to rule Palestine rather than an international zone. On the other hand, France refused to void the agreement. The French were determined to retain control over Syria. Also, the defeat of Germany increased Anglo-Franco tensions, and each country sought gains of war. Upon entering the Paris Peace Conference, France feared Britain sought to obtain Syria, and thus eliminated French regional encounter, exchange, and influence. The greatest impact of the Sykes-Picot Agreement was on the Arab world. Arabs typically include the agreement in their criticism of two other World War I-era conflicting promises regarding the nature of Palestine, the Hussein-McMahon Correspondence and the Balfour Declaration. The Sykes-Picot Agreement had a tremendous impact on World War I. The agreement helped the French and British to send armies and agents into the Middle East to encourage revolts in the Arabian Peninsula and to seize Iraq, Syria, and Palestine. Also, the agreement helped British and French forces encounter and reach enemies in the East during the war. Furthermore, since Britain and France were amidst a war, it was difficult for Britain and France to adequately control the area. Almost immediately after the war, Arab resistance movements emerged to challenge European encounter, exchange, and exploration in the area. Each country began to revolt and protest for freedom, not from their own government, but from British and French influence. British and French powers were forced to fight back, and the effect was tremendous. In this conflict, known as the Arab Revolt, both sides lost many troops. Although the countries broke away from ties with Great Britain and France, the two countries left their imprint on the area. French and English began to be spoken in the areas each country controlled, and the Arab world became more westernized as a result. The Sykes-Picot Agreement had many long-term effects on the Middle East. Although controversial, the borders decided on in the agreement are still used today. Also, the agreement created a long struggle with instability in the area. The Middle East became built on uprisings, causing insecurity and chaos to form in the area. Terrorism and Islamic extremists grew rapidly in the area, and some have publicly stated their intentions of breaking away from borders of Sykes-Picot. Throughout the years, Western powers have become highly involved in the Middle East, and as a result, the Middle East has come to rely on Western encounter and exchange too much. The Middle East has grown weaker since the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and the instability in the area may be rooted from the treaty. Overall, the Sykes-Picot Agreement has had negative effects on the Middle East. The agreement caused Great Britain and France to be known as the sick man of Europe for many years after the treaty was created.
The Sykes-Picot Agreement was a pretty shameful document, and I wouldn't attempt to defend it. But it was drawn up by people who were sort of operating under the old kind of balance of power considerations in an imperial frame of mind.
Certainly, Great Britain and France left their influence in the area through encounter, exchange, and exploration. English and French are widely spoken throughout Middle Eastern countries. The encounter, exchange, and exploration of Great Britain and France in the Middle East had its pros and cons, but overall, its negative effects have trumped the positive, and the negative effects are still relevant in the area today.